Hello and welcome to this Paris Peace Forum pitch session on a very important topic, which is private sector for refugees. What is the role of the private sector for refugees and helping the refugee agenda? And how can we bring economic solutions to business and refugees? I first want to tell you that there are a lot of refugees today in the world. The UNHCR estimates that there are more than 70 million internally displaced people in the world, including more than 25 million refugees. And this is a problem which is growing. And so there is a global challenge on this. There is usually a humanitarian response to those issues about refugees, which has been complemented by a development response. The question is now, how do we bring the private sector into this story? I'm here to talk to you about that, and my name is Benjamin Herzberg. I am a senior private sector development specialist at the World Bank, where I also lead the Private Sector for Refugee Initiative, which is an initiative that is trying to address this very issue of how do we leverage the private sector to come and help empower economically refugees all around the world. This is an initiative that takes into account the fact that many companies around the world have been trying to change their business model so that they can do good and do well at the same time. And you have on the left of this slide a lot of the companies which are involved with the World Economic Forum on the Humanitarian Investing Initiative. And these are companies that are very active. They are global players. They have global supply chain. They invest all around the world. And they have a diverse workforce and a diverse way to address the market. And the refugee issue is core to some of the things that they do, because either they employ refugees or they invest into companies that are refugee related or are located in countries where you have refugee situations. And so with a number of partners, which are on the right side of your slide, we decided at the World Bank to try to gather the knowledge around this with the International Chamber of Commerce, the UNHCR, the European Investment Bank, and the Confederation of Danish Industry. We founded something called the Private Sector for Refugee Initiative, which is a project where others are very interested into, like the World Economic Forum, the Open Society Foundation, the 10th Partnership for Refugees, which is really active with the private sector, MasterCard foundations, and also bilateral donors and partners, development actors, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark or DFID in the UK. And we also have more private sector partners like the Refugee Investment Network, who are trying to bring all the investors together around this issue. So with all those different partners, what we are trying to do is to see how we can bring solutions so that all the brands that are on the other side of the slide can work together to really help develop this agenda. But also, how can we create the conditions within the countries where refugees are present so that the refugees can be empowered economically? In order to tell us how this is important, I want to play a little video for you where we have at the highest level of the some of the organization I just named, we have the management that is telling us this is important. This is a direction that we need to take. I'm going to play a video where we're going to have John Denton, who is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, Mary Pangestu, who is the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnership at the World Bank Group, and Filippo Grandi, who is the High Commissioner of the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR. They will tell us their perspective as to how we can look at all these issues and why it's important. Give me just a minute as I put the video on. And and it will take just a little second. Here you go. And let me now play the video for you.
Colleagues, we're seeing increasing nationalism and protectionism in the world today, and sadly, hostility in many places towards migrants and towards refugees. But the current pandemic has shown us one thing, and that is that no man or woman is an island to themselves. Everything and everyone is connected, and we need to help others to be able to help ourselves. Experience has shown that when given the chance, refugees and migrants can and have made immense contributions to the communities in which they live. Businesses play a crucial role in helping refugees integrate and add value to host economies. The private sector for refugees initiatives brings together businesses, the public sector, and other stakeholders. Combining efforts will make individual endeavors stronger. Integrating refugees makes sense for business and makes sense for society. We look forward to working with our partners and with ICC's global network, our extraordinary network, to bring this to an end. If you would like to do the same, please join us. You are very welcome.
Hello, my name is Mari Pangestu. I am the World Bank's Managing Director for Development Policy and Partnerships. COVID-19 conflict and climate change is expected to lead to hundreds and millions more people to enter into extreme poverty. Out of this, refugees will bear a disproportionate burden of this triple crisis. And already more than 79.5 million people, or slightly over 1% of humanity, have been displaced from their homes by the end of 2019. The World Bank is fully committed to addressing the causes for forced displacement and improving the lives of those affected. But we know we cannot do this alone. That is why we are partnering with the International Chamber of Commerce, the European Investment Bank, the UN Refugee Agency, and the Confederation of Danish Industry to create economic opportunities for refugees and their host communities. We're looking forward to hearing your ideas and working together with you towards this important goal and towards a better life for refugees. Thank you.
2020 has confronted us with a global health crisis that requires united action on an unprecedented scale. COVID-19 respects no boundaries. Everyone is at risk, and some of the most at risk are the nearly 80 million displaced people worldwide. Imagine going through this crisis without access to soap, clean water, or enough food. No hope of isolating your family. That's the reality for millions of refugees. I have seen the valuable contributions made by our private sector partners. Innovative businesses have worked with us to overcome barriers and develop solutions. We each have a role to play. Everyone can make a difference, and every action counts.
Thank you to our three introductory speakers. I am now going back to the presentation, if you allow me. Here you go. You have heard from those three important speakers the importance of this agenda. And the question is, what have we done about this? Well, we started a journey, and that is a global knowledge journey to try to bring together all the different players that were, from an international point of view, looking at what's happening in terms of the private sector role for the refugee issues. And so in June 2019, or was it July 2019, we gathered more than 200 organizations in Paris, and we had a conference where during that conference we explored the various topics that are composing this issue of the role of the private sector, from the point of view of the private sector, but not only, also from the point of view of governments and from the point of view of entrepreneurs, from the point of view of investors, from the point of view of development partners. And what we did is, during this event, we had some kind of a hackathon where, through a speed writing exercise, in a matter of a few days, we put the backbone of a charter of good practice. And this charter of good practice is divided into 4 topics: entrepreneurship, investment, employment, and the adaptation of products and services towards refugees. What you see, the person you see on the left of the screen here is our good friend Tarek Haddad, who is an entrepreneur in Canada, and his company and his home was destroyed in Syria due to the conflict, and he became a refugee in Canada, and he participated to this event to elaborate this charter of good practice. So this charter of good practice, as I said, is divided into a number of topics. And let me run you through some of the issues and examples that we have on this charter of good practice. So first, entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, we know, is key to the integration of refugees because of their need to sustain themselves, to have livelihoods, and to develop means to live in the countries where they are. They also bring a lot of competencies that they can put to bear on through creating companies. We have a lot of examples. The one that I was mentioning just now from Tarek Haddad is called Peace by Chocolate. And Peace by Chocolate is basically a chocolate factory. And through this chocolate factory, Tarek Haddad was able to really rebuild an entire ecosystem of entrepreneurship where he's located in Canada, provide jobs not only for himself or other members of the refugee community, but also for local people as well. And the host community, of course, is extremely important. We have on entrepreneurship an example, for instance, from the CSO called SINGA. SINGA is a civil society organization that is organizing boot camps and incubation centers for integrating the refugees with the host community so that together they can access incubation services. And we see that in many other countries where you have incubation centers so that refugees can really be hosted in a place where they can develop their business plan, they can access the services on entrepreneurship training, and as well as be connected, because as we know, the network is very important. That's why, for instance, after the refugee crisis in Syria, the Syrian International Business Association came to life, which is a global network of Syrian entrepreneurs that have relocated in the diaspora. What is for them is a diaspora, which is all the set of host communities where they are. And they have created local chapters to provide support to entrepreneurship locally. And so for this topic of entrepreneurship, we have the charter will give you guidelines as to how to do it, what kind of regulations are important, how do you consider the training, what is important in terms of financing or in terms of programming when you're designing development policies for the country. And for the bodies that are trying to promote entrepreneurship locally, how they consider that refugee dimension specifically as part of the services that they give to the host community. The second topic that we have is a topic of employment. And employment is, of course, extremely important because that's one of the main ways that refugees integrate into a country and can sustain themselves financially, either to remain here or even if the situation improves later on to go back to their country of origin, is through jobs. Refugees need jobs like you and me, and in order to do so, they need to have access to jobs. And what does that mean? That means that they need to be able to have work permits. But so there is a set of prerequisites that the Charter of Good Practice goes into. And when those prerequisites are open for the refugees, we can see that it becomes beneficial for all. For instance, the global company ISS, which is a global leader in terms of cleaning, catering, security, and so on, they have done a lot of work for refugees, and they give specific training for the refugees, and so that they can integrate into the workforce. And they have a workforce from about 100 different countries around the world. And so they've been promoting that refugee employment for more than 20 years. And what we see is that when you do the right thing as an employer in terms of enabling the refugees to come, then you actually get very productive, very dedicated workers. We see that also in specific sectors. For instance, in Lebanon, the BWI, which is the Building and Woodworkers International's Union, they've done specific programs to integrate refugees into the construction sector, because often that's one of the sectors that hires a lot of refugees, but you have to do it in a way that is legal, keeps the security standards and the safety standards and the social standards. And that's why the Charter of Good Practice also insists on the protection and rights to refugees that are needed within companies so that they can be well integrated. We have other topics that the Charter of Good Practice talks about and why this is very important. The topic of investments. Investment, that's a third topic. I talked about entrepreneurship and employment, and now investment. Because there is a lot of capital around the world, and we have a lot also of impact capital. And how is this capital being deployed? We know that some investors have negative list, meaning we will not invest into, let's say, a company that creates arms and weaponries, or we do not invest into companies that have a negative damage on the environment. From that, we went to a positive list, a positive impact that the investors want to do through impact investment by saying we want to promote particular inclusion of such group or of such issues and all this. And the refugee investment goes into the stream of thinking where investors are trying to reach social returns and public good returns as well as profit. And they realize that when they do the both together, it can actually work to everybody's advantage. It becomes a win-win situation. We have several examples, like COIS, for instance, which is an international blended finance advisory firm, which has a refugee livelihood development impact bond in Jordan that can potentially bring up to 6,000 jobs for enterprises and people in Jordan, refugees and host communities, but also bring an 8% rate of return. And so you can see that both can work. We have microfinance funds that have worked in this space for a very long time. At the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation, with other partners, we're trying to develop different kind of solutions that not only bring new fresh money into the market, but also leverage existing financial institutions so that we can do this by targeting companies that have an impact on refugees. That doesn't mean that these are refugee-owned companies, but they can be refugees that employ companies that employ refugees, companies that service refugees, and so on and so forth. And so the investment strategy is very important to cater it to strategies and to cater it to refugees and make sure that we can bring that into the realm of impact investing altogether. The last topic that we have in the Charter of Good Practice, a part of entrepreneurship, employment, and investment, is the adaptation of products and services for the refugees as a market. Refugees, in fact, represent a market with people who need goods, who need services, they need to educate themselves, they need to do a lot of different things. And what are the products that the private sector has and services that can be adapted to them? So when we talked about employment, we also meant, of course, the issue of education, but they can also be private sector providers of vocational training, for instance. And when you talk about private product and services, you can look, for instance, at a company like Life Shelter, who provides temporary, like physical structures for temporary communities in up to 8 countries. You have Dinarak, which is a mobile payment company, which is located in Jordan, in other countries. You have a lot of mobile payment companies. You have MasterCard, who is present in a number of countries where they're trying to adapt their product and services to refugees. Banks are also a player in that context, but also different type of providers of different types of services. So let me go back now to the presentation that I was doing, so I can come back to sharing the screen and just carry on from where I was. Before I started to tell you about the entire content of the Charter of Good Practice. So I'm just going to launch my slideshow again for your benefit. So you can see now that, hold on, excuse me for this little technical issue. Here you go. So I talked about entrepreneurship, I talked about employment, I talked about investment, and I talked about services and products. Now, all this knowledge is accessible to you in the shape of a website, and where you will be able to find the Charter of Good Practice. With our partner, the International Chamber of Commerce, we've concocted a knowledge repository, which is what we call the PS4R website, Private Sector for Refugee website, and that's hosted on the ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce. So if right now you go to the ICC, you will be able to see this website. If you type Private Sector for Refugee Initiative, and in there, you will find that for each of those components, you will have about 5 different sets of guidelines. On the screen is a summary of those guidelines, but if you download the charter, you will see all of them that really look at what makes it happen on the ground. And it's very important to look at it on the ground. What are the results of this? Not only are we partnering in terms of knowledge, so that we can increase the capacity of the market actors, whether they are government, private sector, development partners, but also we're trying to see how we can create joint projects to really push this agenda forward. And we're partnering with all those different agencies that I talked about at the beginning, or with the Refugee Investment Network and others, the Center for Mediterranean Integration, and many other institutions and groups that all have the same goal, making this work on the ground. What does that mean? That means that at the World Bank, when we do projects in countries that are affected by a refugee issue, and we're doing a private sector project, we try to bring in a refugee dimension when we can, so that the PS4R principle are included into this. With our colleagues at UNHCR, that means that they're looking into innovative finance solutions, so they can complement the help that they are giving to the refugees in terms of humanitarian help, with really a development response that takes into account all those various dimensions. Now, I want to come back to some of the questions that have been asked on the chat, and I will ask my colleague Dimitri, who is online, to help me access those questions. So I see them as they come, and I will try to answer while I leave on the slide the coordinate of the website. Someone will want to know practical ways to ensure that the most targeted private sector approach, to ensure a more targeted private sector approach in development projects. Well, this is what I was trying to address. The issue of how do we bring a targeted private sector approach, meaning how do we target the right private sector? When it comes to investment, we're looking at investable opportunities. Every investor is looking at investable opportunities. And sometimes those opportunities are few and far between. So if you put the right type of guidelines into your investment and selection criteria, looking into what is a refugee-related company, you will be able to deploy your capital on investable opportunities that are related to refugees. Maybe this company is providing solution at the top of a supply chain, with downwards will actually have an impact on refugee employment. Now, often refugee-related companies in countries that are fragilized by the environment in which they are, including the refugee crisis, and are still in development, you might need to develop a lot of technical advisory alongside your investment in order to target those companies properly. Because banks, when they invest, have very high return thresholds and very low risk thresholds. It's normal. They're a bank and they want to make money. And so in order to help them invest into companies that are refugee-related, maybe capacity building is welcome. We have another project, another questions here. Given that, let me just here stop sharing my screen so I can see better the question. Given that this is a Paris Peace Forum, how do you think the PS4R initiative contributes to global governance? I think globally, we have managed to bring together through the PS4R initiative a really interesting set of partners. And I think when you talk about global governance, you need to talk about a mix of partners so that you have a real dialogue between people. We don't want people in an ivory tower somewhere who are doing development in a bubble, and people on the ground, actual enterprises which are involved in creating product, creating services, and employing people being disconnected. We need to bring the two together. And I think PS4R does that and contributes through this partnership angle to the global governance on development, because it brings together not only development partners, but also some governments and the learning and the lessons learned from places where governments have implemented those kind of regulatory environment and services that really help include refugees and empower them, because they recognize that refugees can be an asset to their countries. But it also brings the private sector and the business intermediaries, those associations and those NGOs that together can contribute to this agenda. So I have here last question. Great initiative and highly needed. Thank you very much for whomever asked that question. Thanks to all. Are there any opportunities to link the small local enterprises established by refugees with global enterprises? I think there are. And as part of some of the program we developed under the Private Sector for Refugee Initiative, we have, for instance, a very interesting program in Jordan on business-to-business matchmaking, where we try to link the global purchasers on one side and local suppliers on the other side, so that they can meet in the middle. And sometimes the global purchaser have an intent to try to include refugees in their supply chains, but they don't know how. And development agencies or business intermediaries have the sector knowledge and have the local context knowledge. And so sometimes just bringing people together can have real impact. In Jordan, for instance, we managed through only a few of those business-to-business matchmaking to have real development impact through a program we have over there called the Refugee Investment and Matchmaking Platform. More than 1,900 jobs were created, leading from the business-to-business deals that were created because development partners, private sector, business intermediaries, and the government worked together to bring everybody around the table and see the opportunities. Because at the end of the day, refugees are an opportunity for themselves and for the society in which they belong, and the private sector has a very strong role to play in order to include them and empower them. I hope this presentation was useful to you. We are available for if you need further resources and to be in touch with you. Thank you very much.